He was 70 years old. 3 weeks before he died, his doctor told him everything looked fine: blood pressure manageable, cholesterol within range, heart rhythm normal on the ECG. That evening, he had dinner with his family in Portland, watched television, and kissed his wife goodnight. He did not wake up. The cause was a massive cardiac event, the kind that strikes in the quiet hours and leaves nothing for anyone to do. His family spent weeks trying to understand how a man who had been told he was perfectly fine could be gone by morning. There was no warning, no chest pain, no moment of alarm, just the terrible stillness of a morning that should have been ordinary. And at the center of that night was a habit he had practiced every single evening for decades, one that research now links directly to nocturnal cardiac events, one that almost nobody warns you about. Now I want to tell you about a second person, a woman, 65 years old, who woke at around 2:10 in the morning with her heart pounding so hard she thought something was terribly wrong. She called an ambulance. The paramedics found her blood pressure at a level that alarmed them immediately. She survived. But when the cardiologist sat with her afterward and asked about her evening habits, she went very quiet. And then she said something I have never forgotten. "Nobody ever told me this. Not once in 65 years. If you regularly eat dinner within 2 to 3 hours of going to bed, and you are over 60, this video was made for you." I am Dr. Daniel Brooks. Welcome to the Stronger Seniors podcast. With me today is Dr. William Carter, a physician with 33 years of experience in cardiovascular medicine and geriatric care, dedicated to helping adults over 60 protect their hearts during the hours that matter most. Dr. Carter, most people believe that if their checkup results look clean and their daytime blood pressure is under control, their heart is safe while they sleep. After everything you have seen in over 3 decades of practice, why is that assumption so dangerously incomplete?
Daniel, that assumption is one of the most consequential gaps in how we currently communicate cardiovascular risk to older adults. And I say that not to alarm anyone, but because the research is unambiguous, and most patients simply never hear it in a standard appointment. Here is the reality. The cardiovascular system does not behave the same way at night as it does during the day. And the tools we use in a standard clinical visit, the afternoon blood pressure reading, the resting ECG, the cholesterol panel, every single one of them captures what your heart is doing while you are awake, upright, and sitting in a doctor's office. Not one of them captures what your heart is doing at 2 in the morning. And for adults over 60, what happens during those overnight hours can be dramatically different from what any daytime reading suggests. We are going to walk through exactly why that is, and by the time we finish today, I think a number of people watching will understand something about their own cardiovascular risk that their doctor has simply never had the time to explain.
Dr. Carter, you just mentioned something that I think will surprise a lot of people watching right now. You said that every standard clinical tool we use measures the heart during the day, but none of it captures what is happening at 2 in the morning. Can you explain why that nighttime window is so uniquely dangerous for adults over 60?
The American Heart Association has documented for decades what cardiologists refer to as nocturnal cardiovascular vulnerability. It is a well-established, clinically recognized phenomenon in which the risk of heart attack and stroke rises sharply during the sleeping hours, particularly between midnight and 6 in the morning. Now, in a healthy young cardiovascular system, the body manages this window smoothly. Blood pressure follows a natural rhythm. It rises during active waking hours and then dips during sleep, typically falling somewhere between 10 and 20% from the daytime peak. We call this the nocturnal dip, and that dip is biologically essential. It is the window during which the heart gets something close to genuine rest. The arterial walls decompress. The vascular system performs maintenance it simply cannot manage during active hours. But here is the problem. Research estimates that between 30 and 50% of adults over 60 do not experience that dip. Their blood pressure either stays elevated during sleep or actually rises. And those individuals are carrying a sustained pressure load through the most cardiovascularly vulnerable hours of the night without feeling a single symptom.
That number genuinely surprises me. 30 to 50% of adults over 60 may not be getting that protective dip at night, and they would have absolutely no way of knowing it from a standard daytime checkup alone. What does the research actually show about how dangerous that non-dipping pattern is for long-term cardiovascular health?
The data is sobering, Daniel. A landmark study published in the journal Hypertension followed more than 3,000 adults with an average age of 66 over 4 years. The findings were unambiguous. Adults with a non-dipping nocturnal blood pressure pattern had a cardiovascular event risk, including heart attack, stroke, and sudden cardiac death, more than double that of participants whose pressure dipped normally during sleep. Not 10% higher, not 20% higher, more than double. And here's the part that stays with me every time I review this research. That elevated risk was present regardless of how well their daytime blood pressure was controlled. The patients who believed they were protected because their afternoon office reading looked acceptable were, in many cases, experiencing dangerous nocturnal elevations their standard monitoring protocol was entirely missing. Researchers call this masked nocturnal hypertension, and current estimates suggest it affects somewhere between 15 and 30% of adults currently on blood pressure medication who genuinely believe their pressure is under control. I sometimes think of it this way. Imagine hiring a security guard to protect your home, but the guard only works from 9 to 5. Everything looks fine during the day, but from midnight until dawn, the door is wide open.
Dr. Carter, I have to ask the question that I think every single person watching right now is already thinking. If this nocturnal pattern is so dangerous and so common, why has almost nobody heard about it from their own cardiologist or primary care physician? And what is the single most overlooked reason it develops in the first place?
That is exactly the right question, and the honest answer involves 2 parts. The first is structural. A standard medical appointment allows somewhere between 8 and 12 minutes of clinical conversation. The medication review, the cholesterol target, the ECG reading, these are the prioritized items in that window. The nuanced behavioral conversation about evening habits and nocturnal cardiovascular risk simply does not fit. It is not physician negligence. It is a system that was not designed to address what happens in the dark. The second part of the answer is what I find most important for people watching today. Because the research identifies the primary driver of this non-dipping pattern in otherwise healthy older adults very clearly, very consistently, and across multiple independent studies. And it is not primarily a medication issue. It is not primarily genetic. Here is what nobody tells you. The single most common modifiable driver of dangerous nocturnal blood pressure elevation in adults over 60 is eating a substantial meal within 2 to 3 hours of going to sleep. Something so ordinary, so completely built into the rhythm of daily life, that its cardiovascular consequences during the overnight hours have simply never entered the conversation. And that conversation starts right now.
Dr. Carter, you just revealed that a late evening meal is the primary driver of this dangerous nocturnal pattern. But I think most people assume digestion is a gentle, quiet process that happens while they sleep. What is actually happening inside the cardiovascular system during those first few hours after a substantial dinner that makes it so dangerous for adults over 60?
When you eat a substantial meal, your body initiates a coordinated physiological response. Blood flow redirects toward the gastrointestinal tract. The sympathetic nervous system ramps up to coordinate digestion. Heart rate increases modestly, and blood pressure rises. We call this postprandial hypertension. In a young adult, it is a smoothly managed temporary response. In an adult over 60, 3 age-related changes transform it into something far more serious. First, the precision sensors in your blood vessels that signal the body to compensate become less sensitive with age. Second, arterial walls lose elasticity, so pressure waves travel more rigidly. Third, the overall speed of cardiovascular adjustment slows down considerably. The combined result is that the pressure surge after a large meal in an adult over 60 is larger, lasts longer, and is harder to buffer. Research documents that this surge can persist for 3 to 5 hours in older adults. A 9 o'clock dinner means elevated pressure still operating at full force at 1, 2, even 3 in the morning. Precisely during the window the American Heart Association identifies as carrying the highest risk of fatal cardiac events.
Dr. Carter, you mentioned this pressure surge can last 3 to 5 hours in older adults. which honestly sounds like most people eating dinner at 7 or 8 in the evening are going to bed right in the middle of that surge. But I want to ask about something that surprises me even more. You said there is a second mechanism running simultaneously that most cardiologists never discuss in a standard appointment. What is that second mechanism, and why does it make the pressure surge even more dangerous?
That second mechanism involves insulin. When you eat a carbohydrate-containing meal, your pancreas releases insulin to manage incoming glucose. In adults over 60, insulin sensitivity is typically reduced, so the pancreas compensates with higher output to achieve the same effect. That elevated nocturnal insulin level then produces three simultaneous cardiovascular consequences that most people have never heard explained. First, it promotes sodium retention in the kidneys, increasing fluid volume and compounding the pressure surge directly. Second, it activates the sympathetic nervous system further, adding yet another pressure-raising signal from the same meal. Third, it triggers endothelial inflammation inside the walls of your blood vessels. Researchers call the chronic version of this pattern inflammaging, the low-grade arterial inflammation now recognized as the most consistent biological substrate of age-related cardiovascular disease. A study published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology found that adults over 60 who consistently ate their last substantial meal within 2 hours of bedtime showed significantly elevated inflammatory markers in morning blood draws compared to those who finished eating at least 3 hours before sleep. Even after controlling for total caloric intake and dietary composition, the timing alone was driving the inflammatory signal. Every single night, for years.
Dr. Carter, inflammaging is a term I suspect most of our viewers have never encountered before. And I think that description of nightly arterial inflammation building silently over years is genuinely alarming. But you mentioned earlier that there is actually a third mechanism, one you called the most acutely dangerous of the three, and one that goes directly to the heart's electrical system. I have a feeling this one is going to surprise people the most. What is it?
This third mechanism receives the least attention and may carry the most acute risk. It involves the vagus nerve, the longest cranial nerve in the body, running from the brainstem through the chest, directly alongside the heart and into the abdomen. When your stomach is distended with food, stretch receptors in the stomach wall send signals directly through vagal fibers. Think of it as a telephone line running straight from your dinner plate to your heart's electrical system. In a young adult with a resilient autonomic system, that signal is mild and smoothly absorbed. In an older adult whose arterial walls are already stiffened, whose nocturnal blood pressure is already elevated, that same vagal stimulation lands in a completely different cardiovascular environment, one already under pressure, already in the peak window of nocturnal vulnerability. And in that environment, vagal stimulation from a distended stomach can trigger cardiac arrhythmias, abnormal heart rhythms, conduction pauses, and in vulnerable individuals, potentially serious rhythm disturbances. A study published in the journal Heart Rhythm found a direct and consistent association between substantial late evening meals and documented nocturnal arrhythmic events in older adults. Now consider all three mechanisms simultaneously: pressure surge, arterial inflammation, vagal arrhythmia risk, all reaching their combined peak in the same 2 to 4 hour overnight window. In a body that is horizontal, unconscious, and hours from any possible intervention. That is the cardiovascular environment a late heavy meal creates every single night.
Dr. Carter, you have just described three mechanisms running simultaneously during the overnight hours. And I think what makes this particularly unsettling is that none of them produce symptoms the person can feel. But I know from your experience treating patients that the real cost of this pattern often only becomes visible years later. Can you share a patient story that illustrates what this kind of silent accumulation actually looks like in real life?
I think about a patient I will call Gerald, 71 years old, a retired civil engineer from Nashville, Tennessee. Methodical man, careful. He tracked his morning blood pressure faithfully every day and consistently showed his doctor readings that looked acceptable. His physician was satisfied. Gerald was satisfied. What nobody knew was that Gerald had eaten his main meal of the day at 8:30 every evening for 30 years, then gone to bed around 10. He slept reasonably well. He felt fine in the mornings, mostly. Occasionally a mild headache, which he attributed to sinus issues. Occasionally tired in a way that coffee did not fully resolve, which he attributed to being 71. 2 years after I first met him, Gerald experienced a cardiac event during a walk one morning. When we reviewed his history carefully, the pattern was there the entire time. The morning headaches were a recognized clinical indicator of elevated nocturnal blood pressure. The unrefreshing sleep was a cardiovascular system that spent overnight hours managing pressure and processing a late meal rather than completing restorative deep sleep cycles. Gerald survived and recovered well. But he told me something afterward that I have never forgotten. He said, "Dr. Carter, I tracked my blood pressure every morning for 15 years. I thought I was being so careful." And I had to tell him the truth. He was being careful about the numbers we told him to watch. Nobody had ever told him to watch what happened between midnight and 4 in the morning.
Gerald's story is incredibly important because I think it reflects millions of people watching right now who are doing everything their doctor asked and still carrying a risk they have no idea exists. Dr. Carter, you mentioned 5 specific groups of people who carry substantially elevated vulnerability to this pattern. Who are they, and which group surprises most people when they hear it?
The 5 groups I named directly to my patients are these. Adults over 65, because the compounding of reduced baroreceptor sensitivity and arterial stiffening is progressive. Anyone with diagnosed hypertension, even well-controlled, because you are starting every night from a higher baseline, and any nocturnal surge pushes you further into dangerous territory from that higher starting point. Anyone with type 2 diabetes or prediabetes, because insulin dysregulation amplifies every mechanism I just described. Anyone with a history of cardiac arrhythmia, because your heart has already demonstrated vulnerability to rhythm disturbance, and a distended stomach at midnight is specifically conducive to triggering it again. And anyone with acid reflux or GERD, because each nocturnal reflux event independently stimulates vagal nerve fibers, adding a compounding arrhythmia signal on top of everything else. The group that surprises people most is the second one, well-controlled hypertension. Patients hear controlled and feel protected, but controlled means your daytime reading is acceptable. It says nothing about what happens at 2 in the morning after an 8:30 dinner. The buffer between your controlled baseline and a dangerous nocturnal peak is much narrower than your office reading suggests. And I will say this with a small smile. If you recognized yourself in 2 or more of those 5 groups, you are not alone. You are, in fact, in very good company tonight. The important thing is that you are hearing this now.
Dr. Carter, everything you have described so far paints a very clear picture of what is going wrong during those overnight hours. But I know our viewers are ready for the part that actually changes something. You mentioned earlier that every mechanism you described is modifiable. What is the single most important first step that someone watching tonight can take immediately? And why do most people get this step slightly wrong even when they try?
The first and most important step is finishing your last substantial meal at least 3 hours before your target bedtime. Not 2 hours, 3. Here is why the distinction matters. The postprandial pressure curve in adults over 60 takes approximately 2.5 to 3 hours to return toward baseline after a moderate meal. 2 hours means the surge is still fully active as you lie down. 3 hours places evidence-supported minimum distance between the pressure peak and the most vulnerable overnight window. Most people, when they hear this advice, think they are already doing it. They eat at 7, they go to bed at 9:30. That is 2.5 hours. Close enough, they assume. It is not close enough. The curve is still elevated. Move dinner earlier or bedtime later. The specific times matter less than the 3-hour gap between them.
That 3-hour rule makes complete sense, but I suspect many people watching are thinking, what if I am genuinely hungry in the evening? Because telling someone over 60 not to eat at night without giving them a real alternative is, frankly, a conversation that ends very quickly. What should people actually eat if genuine hunger calls in the evening hours?
That is a fair and practical question, and the answer is about volume and composition, rather than complete restriction. Volume drives vagal stimulation. A small, carefully chosen snack does not produce meaningful stomach distension, and therefore does not trigger the full pressure and arrhythmia cascade. A small handful of unsalted walnuts, a few slices of avocado, plain yogurt without added sugar, a small portion of oily fish. These produce a fraction of the insulin response, a fraction of the postprandial pressure surge, and no meaningful vagal activation compared to a full meal. The key principle is satisfying genuine hunger without deploying the full digestive machinery. Your cardiovascular system at midnight does not care whether the food was nutritious. It responds to volume, insulin demand, and sodium load. Keep all three small in the evening hours.
Dr. Carter, I want to ask about something that I know a significant number of people over 60 do regularly and genuinely believe is helping them sleep. You mentioned earlier that alcohol carries a rebound effect that most people are completely unaware of. Why is a glass of wine before bed one of the most cardiovascularly deceptive habits an older adult can have?
This is one I feel strongly about because the deception is so complete. Alcohol is vasodilatory in the short term. Blood pressure dips briefly. The person feels calm, warm, and drowsy. For decades, many older adults have interpreted this as evidence that alcohol helps the cardiovascular system relax before sleep. What follows as alcohol is metabolized, typically 1 to 2 hours after consumption, is a blood pressure rebound, disrupted heart rate variability, and suppression of the deep, restorative sleep stages the cardiovascular system depends on for overnight recovery. A study published in Alcoholism, Clinical and Experimental Research found that even one standard drink within 3 hours of sleep significantly disrupted heart rate variability in adults over 60. And when you combine alcohol metabolism with a full stomach operating simultaneously in the overnight hours, you create one of the most cardiovascularly stressful conditions an older adult can generate without realizing it. The wine feels like kindness to your heart. The data says otherwise.
Dr. Carter, you mentioned 5 steps total. We have covered the 3-hour rule, smart evening snacking, and the alcohol rebound. You said the 5th step costs nothing, requires no equipment, and is available to every single person watching tonight before they go to bed. What is it, and what does the research actually show about how much difference it makes?
Sleep on your left side. Left side sleeping reduces gravitational pressure of stomach contents against the lower esophageal sphincter, dramatically reducing nocturnal reflux and the associated vagal activation that comes with it. A study published in the Journal of Clinical Gastroenterology found that left-side sleeping reduced nocturnal acid exposure by more than 70% compared to right-side sleeping in adults with reflux. It also positions the heart in a way that reduces the mechanical workload of the left ventricle during overnight pumping. Zero cost, zero effort, available tonight. For anyone currently managing reflux with antacids at night, I want to say something important. Antacids address the discomfort. They do not address the vagal stimulation that each reflux event produces. That cardiovascular signal continues regardless of whether you feel the burn. Positional sleep adjustment addresses the source.
Dr. Carter, we have talked about the mechanisms, the risk groups, and the 5 steps, but I want to ask about something you mentioned at the start of our conversation. You said some people watching tonight are not dealing with a future risk. The damage may already be happening right now, and their body is already sending signals they are dismissing as normal aging. What are those warning signs, and which one do most people overlook entirely?
There are 5 signals I want every viewer to hear clearly. Warning sign 1. You wake with a headache, particularly at the back of the head or temples, before standing up, before caffeine, before any physical cause has presented itself. Morning headaches on waking before any activity are a recognized clinical indicator of elevated nocturnal blood pressure. The sustained pressure during overnight hours creates vascular pressure on the cerebral circulation that manifests as the headache you wake with. If this happens more than 2 or 3 times per week, do not attribute it to stress. Ask your doctor specifically about ambulatory blood pressure monitoring that captures nighttime readings. Warning sign 2. You wake in the night with your heart racing, pounding, or beating in an irregular way. This is the direct felt experience of the vagal arrhythmia mechanism we discussed. Occasional, brief palpitations are common and often benign. Recurrent, sleep-disrupting palpitations that wake you consistently are different. Keep a log of time, duration, and what you ate that evening. Bring it to your cardiologist. That pattern is among the most diagnostically useful information you can provide. Warning sign 3. You wake from what should have been adequate sleep feeling genuinely unrefreshed, heavy, foggy, consistently, regardless of hours slept. In many cases, this is not aging. It is a cardiovascular system that spent overnight hours managing elevated pressure and processing a late meal rather than completing restorative deep sleep. If this is consistent across 2 weeks or more, it deserves investigation. Warning sign 4. You experience heartburn or acid reflux regularly after lying down. This is almost universally treated as a digestive inconvenience. It is also a cardiovascular signal. Each nocturnal reflux event independently stimulates vagal nerve fibers. If you are taking antacids regularly at night, please mention that to your doctor in the context of your overall cardiovascular risk profile. Warning sign 5. You snore heavily, or someone has told you that you stop breathing in the night, that you gasp, that there are pauses. I will be direct here. Sleep apnea is one of the most potent independent risk factors for nocturnal hypertension, cardiac arrhythmia, heart attack, and stroke in adults over 60 that exists in the cardiovascular literature. If your partner has told you that you stop breathing in the night, that is not information to file away. That is information to act on this week.
Dr. Carter, if someone watching right now recognizes 2 or more of those warning signs, what is the single most important thing they should do tomorrow morning? And what specific question should they ask their doctor that most patients never think to ask?
Make the call tomorrow morning, book the appointment, and when you sit with your doctor, ask specifically about ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. Ask for a 24-hour reading that captures your nighttime pressure separately from your daytime readings. Most standard blood pressure management is calibrated entirely around office and home readings taken during waking hours. Ambulatory monitoring captures what your cardiovascular system is doing during sleep. The results can tell a very different story from your daytime numbers, and that story is the one that matters most for nocturnal cardiovascular risk. If you also recognize yourself in any of the 5 warning signs, mention each one directly and specifically. Do not summarize. Do not minimize. Say, I wake with headaches before getting up. I experience palpitations at night. I have been told I stop breathing. Give your doctor the specific information that makes the clinical picture complete. You are your own best advocate in that room.
Dr. Carter, before we close today, I want to come back to the man we mentioned at the very beginning. 70 years old, clean checkup 3 weeks earlier, a normal evening with his family in Portland, and then nothing. What stays with you when you think about people like him?
What stays with me is not the loss itself. It is the preventability. The research existed. The mechanisms were understood. The 5 steps I walked through today were available. What was missing was one honest, specific conversation at the right time. And nobody had it with him. I think about Gerald, too. 15 years of careful morning readings, doing everything right by the framework he had been given, and still carrying a risk every single night that nobody had ever thought to explain. Your heart has been working for you every second of every night of your entire life, without being asked, without taking a single night off, without ever asking for anything in return. The very least we can do is stop making its hardest hours even harder. You are having today the conversation that those men never had. And because you are, the outcome does not have to be the same. Finish eating 3 hours before you sleep. If you must eat in the evening, keep it small and specific. Watch your sodium. Put the alcohol down at least 2 hours before bed and understand what its rebound effect is actually doing to your heart. Sleep on your left side. And if you recognized yourself in any of those 5 warning signs, please make that call tomorrow morning.
That is a powerful place to end, Dr. Carter. Thank you. And to everyone watching, if anything in today's conversation surprised you, if there was a mechanism, a warning sign, a connection here that you had genuinely never heard before, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us where you are watching from. We read every single one. If this conversation may have made a difference for you or someone you love, give this video a like and share it right now with every person over 60 in your life. Do not wait until the next time you see them. Send it now. You do not know whose night, whose heart, this information might change. And hit that subscribe button so you never miss our next conversation. Because next time, Dr. Carter and I are going to talk about 5 morning habits that quietly protect your cardiovascular system every single day, including one that most people over 60 have already stopped doing without realizing how much their heart misses it. We are honored to be part of your health journey. This channel is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Always consult your healthcare provider before making health-related decisions. We will see you in the next episode.